You think you'd remember the conversation that finished. You wouldn't. You'd remember the conversation that ended mid-sentence. You think you'd remember the song you heard all the way through. You wouldn't. You'd remember the song you heard half of. The one playing when you walked out of the coffee shop. You'd be humming it tomorrow. This is the Zeigarnik Effect. It was first described by a Soviet psychologist named Bluma Zeigarnik in 1927. And the way she discovered it is genuinely ridiculous. Zeigarnik was sitting in a café in Berlin with her psychology advisor, a man named Kurt Lewin. They were watching the waiters work the lunch rush. Multiple orders, multiple tables, total chaos. And Lewin noticed something. A waiter could rattle off, from memory, every single item every single table at the cafe had ordered, but only if the table hadn't paid yet. The moment the bill was settled, the order vanished from the waiter's brain. Completely. Like it had been wiped. He couldn't tell you what they'd ordered 5 minutes ago. Not because he wasn't paying attention, because the task was done. Lewin pointed this out. Zeigarnik got fascinated. She decided to test it in a lab. She moved the question from cafes to her psychology department. Her experimental setup was simple. She brought in volunteers. She gave each one a series of 22 small tasks. Stuff like solving a small puzzle, doing a quick arithmetic problem, modeling a small object out of clay, stringing beads on a wire. And then, about halfway through each subject's session, Zeigarnik would just cut them off mid-task. Okay, time's up. Move on to the next one. For about half the tasks. The other half, she let them finish. After the whole session, she'd send them home. Hours later, sometimes the next day, she'd ask them, out of the blue, to list every task they remembered doing. And here's what she found. The volunteers remembered the interrupted tasks much more clearly than the ones they'd finished. In her original write-up, the unfinished tasks were recalled about twice as often as the finished ones. Same volunteers, same tasks, same effort. The only difference? Whether the task got closed off. An incomplete task is, apparently, much more interesting to your brain than a complete one. So why would brains be built like this? Why care about unfinished things more than finished ones? The Lewin-Zeigarnik interpretation, which is held up reasonably well, is that the brain treats an unfinished intention as a kind of active tension. A live task is like a string that's been pulled and not yet snapped. The brain has to keep it accessible because it doesn't know when it'll have to come back to it. The moment the task is completed, the tension releases. The string snaps. The brain marks the slot as free, and it can throw the memory away to save room. This is, evolutionarily, a really good system. You're a hunter. You start tracking an animal. You get interrupted by something, a noise, a danger. You do not want your brain to clear the hunt context out of working memory. You want it sitting right there at the front of your mind, ready to resume. Once the hunt is over and the animal is eaten, you can free up that context. Pretty soon, you forget the specific route you tracked. It's an excellent feature for survival. It's an inconvenient feature for being a modern human with 14 browser tabs open. Because the brain doesn't really distinguish between tracking a wild animal and I was supposed to email Steve back. Steve's email sits in your mind with the same biological urgency as a half-finished prehistoric hunt. Until you reply. Then it goes quiet. Once you know about the Zeigarnik effect, you start seeing it everywhere. Because it's everywhere. Earworms. The song you heard half of. Your brain is keeping the music alive because it hasn't reached the resolution. The chorus hasn't closed. That's why you can listen to a full album and forget every track. But hear 10 seconds of a chorus in a car commercial and you'll be humming it for 3 days. Cliffhangers in TV. Why every streaming service ends episodes mid-action. The next episode button gets clicked because the writers literally engineered an unfinished task in your working memory, and your brain will not let it sit. unresolved arguments, the fight you didn't finish, the conversation that got cut short, the thing you wish you'd said. 3 weeks later, in the shower, your brain is still drafting comebacks. Because the script never officially ended. Open tabs, open drafts, half-written emails, half-read books on your nightstand. Each one is a tiny resource your brain is spending to keep that task available. Multiply it by 20 open tabs, and you have what feels like generalized anxiety. It is, mechanically, just 20 Zeigarnik tensions in parallel. Now, important caveat. Modern psychology has tried to replicate the original Zeigarnik experiments many times, and a 2025 meta-analysis concluded the strict effect often doesn't hold up as cleanly as the original numbers suggested. It depends on how engaged the subject was with the task, how much they cared about finishing it, and what kind of task it was. But the basic shape holds. Open loops haunt you, closed loops don't. Okay, so the Zeigarnik effect is real. It's running in your background, and it's affecting how you feel right now. 2 practical takeaways from 100 years of follow-up research on this. First, if you want to remember something, interrupt yourself on purpose. This is why writers stop while a session is still going well. Hemingway gave this exact advice in 1935. Quote, "Stop when you are going good and when you know what will happen next." The next morning, the unfinished thought is still sitting there in your brain, hot and active, and you slot right back in. The Zeigarnik tension carries you across the gap. If you'd finished the chapter the night before, you'd wake up with nothing but a blank page and Zeigarnik silence. Second, if something is keeping you up at night because you can't stop thinking about it, write it down. A 2011 study by the psychologists Masicampo and Roy Baumeister, titled perfectly, "Consider It Done," found that subjects who made a concrete plan for an unfinished task reported far fewer intrusive thoughts about it. Not from finishing the task, just from committing to a concrete next step. The brain seems to accept this has a plan and a place as functional closure. This is the whole psychological mechanism behind to-do lists, behind David Allen's getting things done, behind the satisfaction of finally writing down the thing you've been meaning to do for 3 weeks. You don't have to actually do the thing tonight. You just have to put it somewhere your brain trusts. So tonight, when your brain hands you back the unfinished email at 1 a.m., or the unresolved argument, or the project you've been ignoring, don't fight it. Don't try to make yourself stop thinking about it. That doesn't work because the Zeigarnik tension is not under your conscious control. Just grab a notebook. Write it down, even badly, even one sentence. The tension will release. The string will snap. And then you'll sleep. A 100-year-old observation about Berlin waiters has, it turns out, the answer to about a third of why you can't relax. The brain is a beautifully designed machine for tracking unfinished prehistoric hunts. It is not what great at being told that Steve's email can wait. Curious which counterintuitive psych or science thing we crack next week? Subscribe! Monday's question is about something you do every single morning, and you've been doing it wrong.